Hey guys, and welcome back for another video. So today we're going to be taking a look at a Jordan Peterson discussion in which he and a young lady are discussing narcissism and its implication in today's modern thinking and how it has actually led to the surge in people calling themselves transgender. And so we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the ideas that these guys have come up with and how it's affecting the general population's thinking.
And so I would say this narcissism is also encouraged by educational institutions, because they take young people in and they say, well, your immature messianic desire to save the world, which could be admirable if channeled properly, should manifest itself in this vehement activism that puts you in position of ultimate moral authority over your seniors, let's say, instantly. And that's what you should be doing. And anyone who opposes that is evil and predatory at best. And as a consequence, no punishment is too extreme.
And alongside that you must choose your identity off a list of dozens and sometimes hundreds, like that require the most intense, constant rumination and self-examination. I mean, I was talking to somebody just yesterday who was telling me that a child who's 12 now, has this check sheet for how do I feel? And this is a really happy child. But you're meant to be thinking all the time, like, how am I feeling right now? Am I, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy am I? How this am I? How that am I? How the other am I? This is all a terribly bad idea.
Well, it's clearly bad. Look, one of the things I learned when I was treating people who were socially anxious, I had a lot of anxious people in my clinical practice, which is hardly surprising, because the kind of suffering that requires people to seek clinical intervention. So socially anxious people, when they go into a new social situation, think obsessively about how others are thinking about them.
Yes.
And so then they become self-conscious, often about bodily issues, but not only that. They might become self-conscious about their lack of conversational ability and the fact that they're not very interesting and the fact that they're being evaluated by other people. It's a litany of obsessive thoughts. And you might say, well, you could train people to stop thinking about themselves, but you can't stop people from thinking about something by telling them to stop thinking about something. But what you can train people to do is to think more about other people.
Yes, that is a very good point. We can't always stop people from doing a certain behavior, but what we can do is we can change the behavior into something else. So if we want to stop thinking about ourselves so we don't become the natural narcissistic person that so many in our modern society have become, then what we need to do is make sure we're thinking of other folks and not just on ourselves. The whole narcissism thing is something that has been basically perpetuated by our school systems and now by media. Everything that you see as far as advertising for certain groups or institutions, even churches, what is the main slogan that they always try to get you with? Jesus loves you. God loves you. Always mentioning what someone or something is going to do for you instead of what we as individuals can do for the world. Essentially, if we got away from the narcissistic thought, then we basically wouldn't even be dealing with situations where we're socially inept or awkward, because we wouldn't be thinking about how we look. We'd be thinking about how we can make someone else's situation better, how we can interact and have better conversations with the people by basing our thought pattern about them instead of on what we think. You know what I'm saying? And that's a very great point. And I definitely want to implement that more into my everyday life. Me specifically, I work in customer service. So it's like one of those situations where learning to be a better person is always going to help me on my everyday job.
And so one of the techniques that I used in my practice was, okay, now, when you go into a social situation next time, like we'd go through the niceties of introducing yourself and making sure they knew your name and get that ritualized so that it was practiced and expert and therefore not a source of anxiety. But the next thing is, your job is to make the other person that you're talking to as comfortable as possible, to pay as much attention to them. And so we know that the more you think about yourself, this is literally true. There is no difference between thinking about yourself and being miserable. They load on the same statistical axis. And so these kids that are constantly being tormented by 150 identities, so that's a front not of freedom, but of utter chaos, and then asked to constantly reflect on their own state of emotional well-being and happiness is the surest route to the kind of misery that's going to open them up to psychogenic epidemics, let's say. And the clinical data on that are clear.
I hate to stop it again so soon, but that's exactly true as well. As we live in a society that tells us that we should be happy and be ourselves, but at the same time, we have to socially accept other people who put up fronts and act in ways that we don't always understand, and our perceptions are no longer valid. We are simply here to hear another person's opinion, and we have to accept them, and if we don't, then we're the bad guy. We can't even have opinions that contradict how a person may feel about themselves, even if it's true. We constantly are watching, for instance, one of my videos, the Kendra G Show. Oh my gosh, she's constantly got women on there who talk about the type of men they want, but then the reason they come to find out that they're single is because their expectations for their partner far exceed their own value. Like, this is a society that we're in, though, and it gets even worse, especially dealing with the people that are transgender. And I constantly bring them up because there's been such a surge in it. You got more and more people claiming to be something that they biologically, physiologically cannot be. But we're supposed to accept it and go with it, even though what we're seeing, you're going to tell me my eyes are lying on me right now. I'm looking at you and I'm seeing a man. You're going to tell me that I'm supposed to be seeing a woman. You know, that's the society we're in. And that's why we may very well end up in a, what did he say, a psychogenic epidemic where everyone's just pretty much mass hysteria, because there's just too much contradiction going on with the ego and with how we're supposed to be forced to act. And we're either going to end up in a society that's completely anarchist or probably communist. Like, that's just how our society is going to end up going. Like, either way, it's either option is potential at this point, like how it's going.
And then you land into that, the idea that you may have been led to believe that because you're a not very feminine girl or a not very masculine boy, that means that really you are of the opposite sex. The fact is you're not, and no one around you is going to think that you are, because you don't look like the opposite sex. And you become even more self-conscious, like self-consciousness brought you to this point. And now you're hyper aware that everyone around you doesn't think of yourself as the way that you've just presented yourself. And then you're watching for misgendering. And, you know, you're actually being told that it's a really terrible thing to do and that no one would do this unless they really hated you and they wanted you to die. Like, they want you to disappear. They want trans people dead. They want them gone, you know? I mean, that's what people say about me, that I want, you know, to cause a genocide of some sort. And I mean, like, when did I ever write such a thing? So what that is it's the feeling that you've put all of your ability to care about yourself, understand yourself, define yourself onto other people and how they're looking at you, and they're not looking at you right. They're looking at you funny. So you are now out of control.
And so it's possible, on top of all this, that we have an epidemic of narcissism that's being capitalized on by the woke ideologues who are also likely suffering from the same psychopathology.
Yes, and so you see a lot of things together. You see a lot of different needs or weaknesses or pathologies that are playing out in sync with each other. And so these children, I really do think that they're victims. They're necessary victims of an ideology. So if you're an adult man who wishes to be seen as a woman, and the most important thing that you want is to have people believe that this is something innate, that people are born this way. And that means that there must be children who are trans. And it's not relevant to you whether or not that's actually the case for the individual children. The children are the sacrificial victims of the ideology.
And that's a shame. That's the worst part of it of all of it, is the fact that children are the ones, the future generation is going to be psychologically affected the most by this. We're in it right now, so we have no clue how our children and children's children will end up psychologically based upon this whole idea of wokeism and how total acceptance of everyone and everything is being perpetuated in a society that is basically going bonkers, if we're just being quite honest and frank. I mean, you got people running around claiming to be animals, claiming to be the opposite sex, at an age where they're way past sexual maturation and all of the secondary sexual characteristics are into play. This society of complete narcissism, where we can do whatever we want, be whoever we want, there are no implications, and people have to accept us for who we are, or they're not woke, they're the worst kind of people alive, and then you want to put down conservatism as if it's so wrong, as if wanting to be right and do the right thing in life is just so wrong. And it's really sad. And I love the way these two are talking about it, because it's very eloquent, it's very educational to me as a normal everyday person listening to people who are basically scholars talk about this and explain what's happening in our society in such eloquent speech. I love this kind of stuff, you guys.
Mm-hmm. And so you've got adults who are using children as props for their description of who they are.
Okay, so let's dive into that. So one of the things you do in your book is you detail out a lot of sexual fetishes, tracing them back a couple of hundred years. So imagine that you're a hyper-masculine male. Imagine you're a little narcissistic in your masculinity. And let's say there's a part of your psyche that regards that as unbalanced. And so what happens is you start to have fantasies about the value of the contrasexual temperamental virtues. And those would be the feminine ones. But given that you're not very conceptually sophisticated, maybe the way that counterbalancing tendency manifests itself in you is in fantasies of being female. And that fantasies are so damn deep that they actually involve even the sexual impulse. So Carl Jung, who I think thought more deeply about this than anyone else, believed that as we moved through life, and we expanded our personalities, that we would expand them beyond the confines of a rather stereotypical gender identity and incorporate the virtues of the sex that we weren't. So that would mean for women that they would become more emotionally stable and also more disagreeable as they got older. And for men, it would mean that they became more emotionally vulnerable and more compassionate as they got older. At least they would extend their capability into those domains. And that was a necessary part of expansion and maturity. And then if that's forestalled by narcissism, let's say, or even by inability, then the proclivity to develop those contrasexual tendencies would start to manifest itself in the kinds of fantasies that you described as characteristic of the autogynephilic transsexual. And so then if you think that narcissism is part of what's driving that, right? I'm pushing too hard in the direction that I'm going, and so these fantasies manifest in a compensatory way, that you get a perfect storm. And it's the narcissists who are doing this that insist upon subjective identity, and who also, by the way, are perfectly willing to sacrifice children to their own purposes.
Absolutely. And two things that you notice when you look at these people are, one, what they're seeing when they look in the mirror is not what you're seeing. They're seeing a fantasy. They're seeing a fantastic version of themselves. But you, who are not in love with this idea of the feminine version of this man, you're seeing something a lot less flattering. And that's very hurtful to them.
That's a whole lot to take in. But if we're just simply putting that into like layman's terms, it's basically a situation where as you get older, you are expected to mature. And that's called expansion. Like your brain is supposed to expand in its ability to get along with people in the world and to understand what's going on around you so that you can have a more peaceful and stress-free experience. That's what's supposed to happen as you get older. We all know people who don't change and who literally get worse over time. And then we know people that do change, and some of them change so much that they're the complete opposite of how you knew them when they were young. Like, for instance, God rest my dad's soul, he's a perfect example for me. When I was a child growing up, I remember he was real hard. He was the hard parent. He moved in no way. But as he got older, especially after I probably around 25 to 30 years old, I noticed a different side of him. He was a lot more kind and a lot more gentle, even quiet. Like, he didn't get as angry and didn't yell and shout. And that's something that can be said of most people as they age. They tend to just be a little bit easier to get along with. And then women tend to get stronger. That's why you have women who are like older women typically are better in politics and in positions of power because they have more strength associated with them as they've gotten older. They've learned to say no, and they've learned right from wrong. And they're not so much people pleasing that they're ready to stand up for what they really believe in. And so as we age, that is how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to get better like a fine wine. The society that we are living in, you guys, is creating a narcissistic society. It really is. Like, we're constantly being bombarded with images that are going to create more of a conceited person. Like, I mean, now more than ever, you have people changing everything about themselves that they never used to before. You had ugly people just accept they were ugly. Now you got people running to get plastic surgery for this, for that. People, rushing to have surgeries instead of working hard and trying to be fit and healthy. It's because there's narcissists. At the end of the day, they want what they want, and they don't care about the financial cost as long as they can have it, but they're not willing to put in the hard actual work associated with it. Maybe they feel that they're beyond it. Maybe they feel that they don't have to, or it's not necessary. Who knows? But it's literally like an epidemic at this point, narcissism, and it's causing our society to become more self-conscious. Like, you got people running around more and more aware of how they look, and that's all they care about. And it could be social media. The fact that every time you open up your phone, you're either looking at a beautiful man or a beautiful woman. And so it may be building some level of insecurity in us. And that's just what we're going to have to deal with. But the good thing is about it is that we can become aware. We can become aware of where society is going, the images we're being bombarded with, the things we are being taught in our schools. And we can make sure that we're doing something about it. So like, this video is about how society has created this surge into transgender and into narcissism, and how these things go hand in hand. And it's basically, it's almost as if Jordan Peterson may not have said it, but it's almost as if he views people who are transgender as almost like a mental illness. And maybe in a way it is, but society is not looking at it like that. And he could get a lot of backlash for this, because society looks at transgender as just a person being able to be fully who they want to be. But there was a point in time where some of this stuff was wrong. And so we really have to ask ourselves what's really right. And I think what's really right is what makes sense for everybody, not just yourself. And so guys, definitely leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about this video, and would you like to see more for Jordan Peterson? Definitely let me know. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.